Good afternoon, everybody. Let's just get the screen sharing up. How's everybody doing on this Tuesday afternoon? It is Tuesday, isn't it? Participants, there we go. Brilliant. Welcome, everybody. So we're doing a bit of a test this morning, so please do feel free to turn your videos off if you'd like to. We have sadly force muted everybody just to stop any background noise that's coming through, but we will be coming to a Q&A towards the end, so you'll be welcome to speak. In this session, we're just going to be going through buildings energy. Let me just share, let me present that screen. Where we'll be talking through buildings energy as part of webinar number 4 out of a 5-part series. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat as we go through. Big welcome to Emily and Raina, who I'll be passing over to very shortly to introduce themselves. But until then, you do have me. My name is Adam Bastock. I'm the founder of Small 99. We've been running the Steps to Net Zero program on behalf of Just Enterprise and the Growing Climate Confident website, which I'll come to shortly, trying to just bust some myths really around net zero and give some practical tips for you guys to get started with. Very excited for today's session. I think there's going to be some really good takeaways, and buildings and energy is always one of the biggest opportunities and challenges on how to kind of progress this. So this is a 5-part webinar series, really focusing on the third sector. This is the 4th out of the 5th session. All these recordings are available online. Hannah, I'll ask you to find the link for that and pop into the chat shortly. And today we're going to talk about energy and buildings. The next session, which is towards the end of March, 19th of March, is all on buying and selling and looking at your supply chain. So please do put that in the diary, and I think there will be a link to sign up for that as well. But yeah, today is going to be all about energy and buildings. In terms of housekeeping, so closed captions should be enabled. You should be able to see those and enable those if you would like to. There's the presentation just ended there. So if you've got any questions, please do put them into the chat. Sorry, not the Q&A facility. We don't have that enabled today, but just pop those into the chat and we'll be gathering those up towards the end. Around 2:45, we'll be coming to the Q&A section. So anything that comes up, do just chuck them in there. We will be sending out slides and recordings as well. So please do, make any notes. And if you would like not to be recorded for that, please do turn your cameras off. Otherwise, you may appear in the recording. In terms of where this has come from, so the Climate Confident website is a massive and really good resource on a lot of these different topics, where we are discussing various different kind of challenges and issues, and there's a huge amount of information available to you. And there's also the scorecard, which will give you a really quick, easy 2-minute assessment on what your footprint and where your kind of emissions look like. So do take that. I'm just going to find a link and pop that into the chat. There is an entire section there on buildings and energy where you can start understanding more about this. So please do go and check that out. Part of the reason for that is some of the stats I'm going to be presenting today will be looking at the findings and information that we've taken from this scorecard. So it really helps us as a sector to understand what's going on, what the challenges are, but also gives you really tailored personal information to your organization to take action with this. And it's completely free. Beth, would you like to say anything on the climate scorecard, as I can see on the screen just there? I'm going to unmute you now.
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Beth McCushy. I work for SCVO, Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. So I don't have a huge amount to add, Adam. I have been working with Adam and a range of other partners, some of whom are on the call, and other organisations on the Growing Climate Competence Initiative now for almost a year. It's almost a year since we kind of had it ready to go. So as Adam said, there's lots of information on the website. We encourage people to submit stories of actions that they've taken. We've got case studies of other third sector organisations that have done work towards net zero and broader climate action. And the scorecard is there as a quick way to help you get started. So nice to see people on the call today. And I'll let you carry on with the rest of the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Beth. Also, apologies for throwing you slightly into that unannounced, but all's good. In terms of the agenda, so I would like to bring Emily and Raina into the conversation now, who are going to be talking through the 2 respective parts. So firstly, it'll be me. I'm going to give some overview of energy and what's going on in the sector at the top level. as well as what you can do in the buildings and some of the specific actions you can take. And then I'll hand over to Emily from Utility Aid, and then Raina, who's got a really interesting story on what they're doing. So I'm going to pass over to you now, Emily.
Thank you, Adam. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me.
I've just stopped sharing, so you should be able to.
It's working, I believe. Can everyone see my screen? That's a good start. Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you everyone for having me today. My name's Emily Berry. I work for Utility Aid. I also work in partnership with the SCVO, so nice to see Beth on this call today as well. And I'm basically here to give you an overview of practical things that you can start doing today that are low cost and also that can be put into perspective and done for those organisations who perhaps don't own their own premises or buildings. So I'm going to be taking you through a couple of different pieces that you may find a little bit interesting. So a little bit about us, if you don't already know who we are a consultant that work in the third sector with charities, not-for-profits and social enterprises. So we do everything from helping you find cheaper alternatives for procurement to supporting you with your net zero planning journey through audits and carbon reduction support. So a couple of the things that I wanted to go through today that support some of the content that Adam's going to be going through and Raina as well is a market overview. So what's going on in the energy markets at the moment, because now is a great time to be looking at reducing your consumption, not only from a cost perspective, but also because prices are in a good stable position, which is some much wanted news, and also some quick ways in which you can make reductions and savings as well. So to start off with, I wanted to show you all a graph which shows the history of wholesale oil, gas and power prices since the beginning of 2022. We can see that we've had unprecedented prices of 2 years ago, which dominate the picture mainly on this graph particularly. But what we have seen is that we've seen prices return to a normal range. They're not going to go back to what they were pre-COVID, but we're now in a much more stable position. So now is a great time to keep an eye on those markets and see if there's an opportunity for you to take advantage of the low prices whilst we have them. I firstly wanted to talk about understanding your bills, because whilst we're looking at energy efficiency and how you can reduce your running cost of a building, it's really important that you look at this holistically with your procurement and with what you're consuming on site together as one. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that it's really important to keep an eye on your contract and when you're making reductions on your energy expenditure, because some suppliers will charge you or penalise you for consuming less or more than what is stipulated on the contract. So really important to make sure you look at the two things holistically. But some quick wins for you. One of them is estimated readings. So we know at Utility Aid, the majority of customers that come to us for support have been overestimated on their readings. Legally, suppliers only have to come out and visit your site to take a reading once every 2 years. So if you're not supplying readings, or perhaps you haven't got a smart meter fitted already, most likely they will be overestimated because suppliers want to be in a position where they're not chasing you for a catch-up bill. So I would highly recommend checking your invoices and seeing if you are being charged actuals. And if you're not, it's really prudent that you get in touch and engage with those smart metering tools that are now available. I will go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. VAT and climate change levy charges is another thing to take into consideration if you're on your journey to net zero as well. One being when we talk about things like de minimis on utility bills, this is a bit of a strange one. We are releasing a jargon buster tool on this, so keep your eyes peeled for that in the next couple of weeks. But one of the things to bear in mind is if your consumption changes and moves, you'll automatically be charged at certain rates of VAT in coincidence with this. So it's really important if you're looking at reducing your energy cost to bear in mind that this might actually help you in terms of reducing your VAT on your invoices as well. But if you want any support with that, do let me know, because I do have extra materials. Another area to take into consideration as well is metering charges. And when we talk about this in relation to net zero, we're talking about things like meter operator agreements. So many organisations that we've been working with have a meter operation agreement in place, but they might not actually need the one that they have in place. So the grid and how it is at the moment is set up, and usually things like this aren't changed. So to give you an example, we worked with a care community home, and it was taken over by a different organisation for a completely different purpose. and the usage wasn't going to be the same. So if they weren't aware of that and they didn't notify the grid and the local provider of these changes, they would have been stuck paying certain charges that are tied up within their meter operator agreement. So the best way to know if you have one of these in place, or if this is applicable to you, is by checking on your invoice and looking at your supply number and looking for something called a half-hourly indicator. A half-hourly indicator is on the top of your supply number, the supply number being the bottom one. And if you have a half-hourly supply, you'll have 00 stipulated on the top. Now, it's for these customers that I'm specifically talking to when I'm saying this message. If you have this kind of supply, it's really important to see if you're being charged correctly on your meter operator agreement, which is a separate piece of paperwork. Again, if you need any support with this, let me know and I can talk you through the details, but a couple of ideas of ways in which you can make savings. Looking at how you can make quick savings or start instigating change within your organization with energy saving tips, there's a couple of different ideas I wanted to share with you. So working at Utility Aid, we practice and preach something called creating a culture within your organization. So if you decide to cut energy consumption, make sure everyone within the organization is on board. So use things like organizational wide meetings to brainstorm ideas and consider creating what we call an energy champion. So someone who can make sure that all of these changes and practices that you want to put in place are upheld and followed through. And this can help you make a difference both financially, but also environmentally too. I mentioned this earlier about smart metering, but specifically looking at things like automated meter readings, otherwise known as AMR devices, is a really important tool that can really support you with making changes that will support you on your environmental journey. So an AMR device lets you review your consumption in both operational and non-operational time. So it gives you a really unique ability to understand business patterns and will help you make better decisions when it comes to saving money and reducing your consumption. Checking your energy tariff. So it's really important when you're looking at your energy tariff and looking at how you can reduce your carbon emission, but also reduce cost, to look at what kind of tariff you're on. So are you getting the best value for money? So if you have a day and a night rate tariff, for example, it might be prudent to carry out certain activities if you're running a community building, for example, or a community-based project at certain times of day where those rates might be cheaper. So it might be better to carry out a certain task at night time when your night tariff is perhaps cheaper, especially if you know it's going to involve a high usage on your site. Another thing we talk about is the ghost of energy past. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about phantom energy. And this is used by equipment that's plugged in but not in use. And this is big, but when we're talking about this, we're talking about your base load. So everything within your building that's already there before you've even switched anything on, that's your base load. So if you look at a home, for example, you might think about the TV, maybe you've got an Alexa on, Skybox, an Xbox if you're lucky. All of these things on standby make a huge difference to your base load. So if you practice and preach things like getting everybody to switch everything off that isn't essential at the end of every day, it can make a huge difference to how much you consume on site. And that's something you can implement whether you own the building or whether you rent the building. Controlling the temperature, it's an obvious one, but heating, ventilation, air conditioning can account in some cases for up to 60% of energy costs. So think about setting temperature controls correctly. To give you a couple of examples, the Energy Saving Trust recommends heating your home between 18 to 21 degrees Celsius during winter. That's a good starting point. And this can be something that you can start talking about and having a discussion about in your Energy Champion meetings. And a key thing to remember is a 1% thermostat adjustment can actually reduce your energy costs by 8%. So a really important thing to start practicing and putting into place. I'm going to finish off by talking about some quick things to think about when you're starting on your net zero journey. I think it's something that can be really intimidating for a lot of organizations, and completely understand why, especially with us going on our own one ourselves as well. So I wanted to touch on a few things to bear in mind if you're going on that journey. So if you're getting started, one of the first things you should look at doing is having a carbon footprint assessment. I know that Beth's got some great resources on the website with SCVO that we've push people towards using in terms of the scorecards. And these pieces of information are such a good idea to start with, because it gives you an idea of what you're currently working with. So before you do anything, make sure you're using actual tools that help you build an accurate picture of how much your carbon is right now, and what things can you start to implement today that will make a difference to that. It's not a one-time task, unfortunately. It's an ongoing one, so it requires regular updates and changes to echo any progress you've made as an organisation, and update your emission reduction goals and celebrate those goals as well. And it's really important as well to remember you don't need to tackle everything at once. I think some people focus on things like supply chain first, and how can we make sure everybody we're buying from has the right emissions that match our environmental policy. You don't have to do everything at once. Do them in manageable chunks. And usually when I discuss this with people, I talk about it in reference to scopes 1, 2, and 3 as a really easy way to kind of break this up. So scope 1, you'd be looking at everything that a company makes directly. So for example, that'd be running your boilers, your vehicle fleets, things like that. Scope 2 is where you're looking at emissions organization makes indirectly. So like when the electricity or energy it uses, heating and cooling its buildings, is being produced on its behalf. And the last one to look at, which is probably the most difficult, is everything for all emissions associated with the organization, not directly for itself, but the people it buys from. That's the most tricky one. So try doing scopes 1 and 2, setting your environmental policy so you understand as an organization what's important to you and what criteria should you be going out and asking people for when you're purchasing stuff from them. But remember, you don't need to tackle everything at once, and do things in manageable chunks that work for you. And I believe that is everything from me, Adam.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, no, please do any questions, put them into the chat. We'll come back to Emily towards the end to kind of do a Q&A with everybody, and we'll try and do a bit of a round table. Also on the scopes point, I think really useful to include that. I think energy and buildings are possibly the easiest place to get started with around your scopes 1 and 2. There is more resources around net zero, what it means for you, in the first webinar. So I've popped a link to the chat for the recording for that for you to watch later. Please don't go and watch it now. Please do hold on to us. Quickly, before I dive into my section of slides, and thank you very much, Emily, for that kind of crash course into energy, because it is such a big topic. Just wanted to bring Rainer in to say hello and just introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Adam. From my side, and hello and welcome from Port Gordon here. My name is Rainer Herbert, and I work as a director for the Port Gordon Community Trust here in the northeast of Scotland. I'm the technical director and vice chair, and I will tell you later a little bit about 2 little projects that we did here in the community. One is about the heating system of our village hall, and the second is a small kind of power and water supply for our community garden. And yeah, at the end of the speech from Adam, I think we'll hear about that a little bit more, about 10 minutes from me, and I'm looking forward to show you what we've done here. Thank you.
Perfect. Cheers, Rainer. I'm really excited to hear from you, because I think there's some interesting challenges that you've overcome and faced, and proof that it is all possible. Just to kind of dive into the some lovely pictures of wind turbines. You can't do an energy or a net zero talk without having pictures of wind turbines in them. So thought I'd include some here as we go into kind of what's happened recently. And I wanted to take a bit of a bigger look at really where we're going with buildings and energy more broadly, both from an industry, but also from a national point of view, because I think it's easy to forget how far we've come. So this is the graph of the share of the UK energy grid mix and percentage based on coal. So if you look 11 years ago, back to 2012, almost 12 years ago now, we were operating at around 500 grams or half a kilo of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour. So for every hour of electricity we generate, that was half a kilo of carbon. The reason for that is around 40% of our electricity was coming from coal just 10 years ago. And I think it's really easy to forget how quickly that has reduced. If we look at that for the last year, so in terms of measuring your scope 2 of your footprint around your electricity usage, you would use a figure of around 0.18 kilos per kilowatt hour for the exact same metric. So we've seen a huge reduction of around 65% in the previous 10 years. Now, going back to that first webinar, a lot of these net zero goals are around 50% reduction by 2030 and 90% reduction by 2045. We've been able to achieve a 65% reduction in 10 years. So these things are possible, and this ambitious change and reduction is really available. I'll pop a link to this into the chat later. This is a slightly outdated graph, but a really nice website that I love to use and reference because it just demonstrates the live energy grid of the UK right now. So you can start to see how our energy is being made up, and we'll come on to an example shortly of how that can start influence behavior within the organization as well. LEDs are a great example here where it is a 90% reduction. So again, if we are thinking around net zero, LEDs are often overlooked even still now. It may seem like quite obvious advice, but this is a 90% reduction. You can see on the right-hand side here a picture from Argus where you've got a Philips light bulb. It's 100 watts equivalent. It's actually only using 10 watts of power once you look more closely, and therefore that's your, I know, technically not 90%. It's probably 89% or something like that for the maths people among you, but demonstrates that these sort of reductions are possible. And this is where we do have that technology. So the cost of solar, again, wanted just to highlight how far we've come in the past 10 years. Again, you can see 2010, 2011, it was nearly £400 per kilowatt hour. It's now in 2020, and I couldn't find any more recent graphs of this, unfortunately. It's about £60 per kilowatt hour, and it's falling all the time. So wind energy, solar power are the cheapest forms of electricity we now have. So that cost really has dropped. Don't wait for perfect technology. Use what technology we can adapt, what your team can adapt now. It's not just about waiting for the future to, produce these new technologies. And again, I think Raina's going to talk a little bit about the technologies that they're using on the site. Heat pumps are a great example of this, where quite often some of the barriers are that they don't work. When in reality, if you look at the number of installations across Europe, the UK is far behind, and far colder countries than Scotland are actually using heat pumps very effectively. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate for your building. And I think this is the key thing, is making sure you're confident and that you've undertaken that research to make sure that the technology you are implementing works for not only your building, but as Emily's mentioned there, also your behaviors. How are you using energy in your organization is as important as where it's coming from, and just getting to grips and understanding that. If we look a bit closer at what's happening in Scotland and some of the impacts we've seen from the report, I think renewable energy is quite an interesting one, where we've seen that price drop. We're seeing the grid decarbonize. However, still around a third of people aren't necessarily on a renewable energy tariff. I imagine that is quite likely because it's outside of people's control. And again, feel free to put in the comments in the chat any questions or any challenges that you're facing around that, because it's always really useful for us to hear this. Around a third of people have changed, and around a third of people haven't. So it's quite fragmented. It's quite a split, and this is one of the easiest things you can do. So do look into your energy tariff, and is it buying renewable energy or not? As mentioned, LEDs, that's a huge impact on emissions. That 90% reduction in energy usage is a 90% reduction in cost, as well as your emissions. Yet still we're seeing that 33% of people aren't using them. So a really neat breakdown here of a third, and this is real data, don't worry, that people haven't switched all of their LED light bulbs over. Now, that might be because it's outside of control, which is understandable, but these are going to be energy-saving devices that pay back in terms of the return on investment in around 6 months. It's relatively quick for this. So do a walk around of your premises and look at each light bulb. It's as simple as that. It might be you need to engage with your landlord. And again, there are resources on the Climate Confident website in order to help with that. Now, this is where it gets more interesting into that behavior change piece, where we ask the question of, do you turn off your devices overnight? So, for example, displays, those sort of ghost devices that we mentioned earlier, 63% of people have said yes. So the majority of people are starting to do this. And, 23% are saying where possible, that might be that they don't have access to be able to do it. So we're seeing a good, 85% there of people who are turning off devices. Yet when we ask the question of how many people are measuring the energy usage of those individual devices, 85% of people said that they're not. So people are turning off devices without necessarily being aware of the energy that those devices are using. So you might be spending all of your time running around turning off monitors and TVs and elements like that are very visible. There might be an old fridge in the backyard that's ticking away and is actually using far more energy. And this is where those ghosts or those energy vampires, as another phrase I've heard, are coming from, where there's a huge amount of energy that might be being consumed that isn't being made aware of. So engage your team to make sure that you're actually aware of how much energy these things are using, and smart plugs are a great way to do that. And I think I've got a slide on that later, and if not, I'll put a link into chat to the smart plugs. In terms of tracking, again, we start seeing this, that there's a lack of awareness of energy being used, but there's also a lack of awareness around electricity being used by the organization as well as individual devices. 38% of people are not tracking it at all. How do we start engaging the team to understand the energy that's being used and start reducing it as well, building it into monthly reporting or weekly reporting and understanding this? Turning off light switches on the way out is great, but it might not be having the impact we think it is. So in terms of what you do about this, as mentioned, smart plugs are a great way to identify those energy vampires. They cost £10–15. They plug into the wall, and then you plug the device into the thing, and then on your phone, there's like a little app you'll get that then tracks the amount of usage, and you can automate it as well. So I used to use this over Christmas when we had the Christmas tree lights on. I could either scramble underneath a tree and try and find the plug socket every night to turn it off, or I hit my phone and it would just turn the entire thing off, and I could track how much it was using over that period. I think the LEDs for that were about 50p for the month it was up. Another thing to be using here is, like, if there's a TV or something that's on in the background, you can start automating that to turn off overnight. I know a lot of bigger offices tend to have these displays in process. In terms of behavior change as well, I think there's a really interesting device here from Measurable Energy. No affiliation to them. This is a device that I saw online where you can see the little LED lights, the green lights next to the plug socket. That ties into the grid to tell you when green energy is being produced, and therefore, you can start using more of that electricity when it's cleaner, in order to be able to mitigate and make sure you're using lower carbon electricity sources. So again, thinking back to that idea of engaging team and behavior change on when are we using electricity, not just what are we using, is a really important piece here. There's a great report from the Climate Change Committee that identified that 60% of the changes needed to reach net zero were from behavior change. So it's not just new technology we need, it's actually behavior change as well in order to be able to do that. So think of smart plugs, think of even smarter plugs like this where they're tracking it, to really be able to pull that energy and identify where that energy is being used more accurately in a more real-time sense. You're not just looking at it every year as part of a carbon footprint. You're perhaps looking at it every few weeks as part of your reporting. Heating, as mentioned, is a really big part of your footprint as well, and understanding how staff are using that space. Something that we've seen is people often, when it's too hot or too cold, are using heat inefficiently. So if it's really cold, are people actually sat in front of a really sunny window and then turning the heating down, which is making it really hot, while other people are perhaps experiencing extreme heat. A great example of this actually was sadly not in Scotland, so apologies for the reference, but it was a company down in Crewe where I went to visit them to do a site visit and do an energy audit. They had south-facing glass windows, and I visited them at the start of February. It was a really sunny day. The office was quite warm, and they turned the air conditioning on to turn the office down in February. So rather than opening a window to let the cold air in just for a little bit, because it was sunny, they were turning the air conditioning on. So understanding how your staff are actually using the space there and how they are just using devices and using heating to heat themselves up and cool themselves down is really important. Finally, I think it's making it fun as well. So what's when you're doing it live, you notice the typos, isn't it? What if you had a really big button so that when you left the office, you could hit a kill switch and that turned the entire office or turned the entire building off? That sort of visual piece of making it engaging and making it fun is a much more effective way than sitting in front of spreadsheets and doing measurements. So really try and think about how you engage the team on this and enact that behavior change so it's not just more reporting. That's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Raina to talk about the experience within Port Gordon. Let me stop sharing. In fact, I've got the slides up, haven't I? There we go.
Yes. Thank you, Adam.
Nearly forgot.
Yes. Thank you,
Over
Adam.
to you.
And now from my side, a little bit of a report about some recent projects we did here in Port Gordon as the Port Gordon Community Trust. We are trying to also help our village to move to net zero. And with our assets and activities, we are also trying to achieve really to reduce our carbon footprint and, well, use more sustainable energy. And I will try to introduce you to two little projects here in our village hall and our community garden. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, where is Port Gordon? I think most of you have never heard about Port Gordon and where it is, so I'll give you a small hint here. Port Gordon is on the northeast coast in Scotland. You see on the left picture, there is a little orange arrow that points right where we are. And when you look at it from an aerial view, that's what you would see right now. So on Port Gordon, you see we are right by the coast, and parts of our village is directly at the coastline. And when you look left by the harbor pier, you see a little bit of our community garden, the two polycrops there, and the village hall is actually in the lower right in the foreground behind the trees. So that are the two objects we'll be talking about further. But one more thing here, Moray is actually one of the sunniest places here in Scotland. We have a very low kind of precipitation per year. It's just about 600 millimeters per year, which is similar to central Spain. You can look it up if you like. It's quite similar. And we get a lot of daylight here, particularly in summer, which makes solar panels actually a good choice because we have very long evenings, sometimes up to 20 hours per day of daylight that can be used. So we actually can make good use of solar energy. Next slide, please. Our first project, that is the Port Gordon Village Hall. And this is being used by local groups, by sports teams, by knitting groups, by the local church, by many organizations, but it's always used only in short kind of usage cycles. So previously we had a heating system. I marked them here with the two orange arrows that are just radiators, infrared radiators running about 2 kilowatts of energy each. And we had them all around the village hall. These, what you can see here in the pictures, are the two last remaining before we switched over to a new heating system. You see on the right wall, there are some cables hanging down. That's actually where the old heaters were. We already took them down while repainting. But the two ones on the far side are still available here in this picture, and these systems were used for decades for heating up the village hall on demand and keeping it warm during events and activities. And they are a nightmare from the energy cost because they just provide the amount of energy you put in electrically. So for example, two of these have about 4 kilowatts, so you have to pay for 4 kilowatt hours every hour just for running two of them. And altogether, we talk about 10 of them that were running in the village hall, and that creates astronomical cost in electricity. So that's why we had to remove them and come up with a better idea. Next slide, please. So after lots of research and some local experience from my side and others, we thought a heat pump might be the direct and best approach. The reason for that is actually it's a bit unusual because we have a different usage profile, for example, than in the normal permanently lived-in house. We have a strong demand for heating up the village hall on demand, quickly and efficiently. So maintaining the temperature and making it as smooth as possible is not as important for us as having the ability to warm up the hall after a longer period of non-use and get it into kind of a comfortable temperature range. So, and these systems you see here are not the typical heat pumps you would use in kind of residential buildings. They are not so-called air-to-water heat pumps. They're air-to-air heat pumps. What they do is actually they use the refrigerant in the system directly to create warm air on the inside. That has a certain advantage. It reacts much faster than an air-to-water heat pump because it doesn't have to heat up the intermediary kind of stuff like the water in the system first before it's finally transferred to a radiator. Instead, you have strong heat exchangers here at the wall that are fan assisted that directly within 30 seconds of the startup of the system blow a lot of hot air into the room. And beside that, they have a very high efficiency. They have a so-called coefficient of performance of up to 5. That means they deliver up to 5 kilowatt hours of heat for each and 1 kilowatt hour of electrical energy being used. So they are 5 times as efficient as the old resistive heaters on the walls were. And from our first months of use in winter, we are quite happy with the system. It warms up the room on demand, quick and fast. Within 20 minutes, the hall is warm and can be used. And it's also evenly distributing the heat. We have a very high ceiling, but the strong fan assistancy helps also to keep kind of accumulation of hot air under the ceiling at bay and makes a good mixture and a good mixing of the warm air possible. Beside that, we have the modern ability of remote controlling these devices. So anybody within the Village Hall committee has a small smartphone application that can control these devices and start them from anywhere in the world, which makes it quite comfortable with a schedule of certain kind of events. You can even automate it so that these systems come on automatically and shut down after 1 or 2 hours again to save as much energy as possible. Next slide, please. Our second project, the Port Gordon Community Garden. Within the last 3 years, we erected these polycrubs, as you can see, in the very close to our harbor and the coastline. It's a little bit outside the residential zone, and that has the problem, it doesn't come with any mains electricity and water connection. So, and in the garden, you need at least water, well, and some light might also be helpful in darker times. So we thought about how to get water and electricity into this garden area. And then we came up with a simple solution. We call it today the solar shed. And you can see it already as the little kind of triangular shed at the center right part in the green. This is actually, you can see also the 2 solar panels on it, and that's mostly it. And what you can see, I'm going to explain with the next slide, please. So here you see our solar shed a little bit more in detail. It's nothing else but a little self-built shed with a few solar panels on it. And inside the shed, there's a small system that provides electricity to these crubs. You can see there's an overhead line, a overhead cable leading to the crubs. That's the one part that ends up in a few AC outlets inside the polycrubs. So we can plug in lights, or we can plug in an automated watering system. But the main application actually is to run the pump for our rainwater cistern in the ground. You see on the picture, a smaller picture on the lower right, you see this 3,000 liter polyester tank that went into the ground under the garden before we put the plant on top and set up the polycrubs. And that contains the rainwater that we collect with gutters around the polycrubs. So we have a 3,000 liter water capacity here. Well, and the next step is how to get it out of the ground. And for that reason, we have installed a submergible pump that uses about 900 watts of power running. So it provides pressure and enough flow to actually fill the barrels or even water the plants in the crops directly. But this system needs a lot of power, as I said, and to kind of create the supply for that, we need a few batteries that collect the solar power, and we need an inverter that actually then converts the DC electricity from the batteries in the typical household AC power that can also be used with the pump in the cistern and with the AC outlets in the polycrubs. And behind that, it's actually only a 300 watt of solar panels and a 4 battery system with altogether 24 volts and 200 amp hours. And the most expensive part actually is that inverter. That's the big lump with a blue and black thing here in the small pictures in the middle. This is a so-called low frequency inverter that provides 3 kilowatt constant and up to 9 kilowatt peak power to very complex loads like an electric pump. This is very important here for the technical freaks to understand that, particularly for motors and pumps, you need much more power than for typical other devices like lamps, lamp bulbs, or whatever. And that has to be kind of kept in mind when you design a system like that, that you have enough impulse power or complex power during the startup of motors. Otherwise, it's just a solar charger that can also be remote controlled. So with a simple smartphone, you can always check from the outside, is everything working? What is the charge status of the batteries? How much has it been used during the last days? How long does it take usually to recharge? And that makes life quite easy. So you don't have to open anything or read any meters. You can see it right on your smartphone. So that system is now working for about 2 years successfully. And we usually need to run the pump only for half an hour. That is enough to fill certain kind of barrels that we have in the crops with rainwater, and then it can be used with smaller devices to spread it out onto the plants and veggies that we have here, and that works like a charm. Otherwise, we can also run the pump for at least 45 minutes constantly if we need it to really water the outside parts in dry spells during the spring. And that still works fine. But one thing, in winter, recharging takes much longer by the solar panels than in summer. That's something to keep in mind. But otherwise, that system has proven itself as quite useful and reliable. And we are now able to say that our community garden is completely sustainable regarding water and electricity. Next slide, please. If you have any questions and want to know some more technical details, this is how you can reach me. Perhaps Adam can put these also somewhere into the chat. So I'm glad if anybody has questions to answer them as good as I can. And if you're planning something similar, I might be able to give you a few kind of indications where you can find things, how to design things, and how to start. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. Adam, back to you.
Thanks, Rainer. I think that's really interesting. I love the kind of examples there, and amazing that the northeast of Scotland gets less rain than the central Spain does. I think it's always a key fact, and it's not one for this webinar, but we do have a map of kind of the UK and how climate change is going to start affecting it, where we do start seeing the northeast getting a lot drier, and certainly the southeast of the UK as well, also getting a lot drier, while the west coast gets wetter. So don't always think about climate change as impacting everyone equally. There are going to be regional changes to this, and kind of the rain cycles, etc., will become more varied, and therefore looking at how you're using water usage and how you're storing, like rainwater harvesting, like you're talking about, is really important, especially if you are in agriculture or something. So, final link there that I forgot to click to the Facebook group. Brilliant. So I'm going to come off share very quickly. We've got kind of 10-15 minutes now just for any questions that are coming through that anyone would like to ask. If not, I have got some noted down to ask both Rainer and Emily, but I just wanted to open it up really to the floor. So if you can, I believe you can raise your hand. Just if you'd like to ask a question to any of the people we've heard from so far. Or pop your question into chat if you don't want to come off mute. That's also fine. While we wait for questions to come through, I was going to ask Emily. Oh, there we go. Sorry, a question immediately as I started talking there. Funding. This is probably one for both of you in terms of how can you fund this work? And I guess, Rainer, how did you fund that work?
Yes, we were able actually to identify several funding opportunities, particularly that help with the net transition to net zero. And they were actually quite happy to help us to fund the heating change in our village hall, and also this kind of solar shed for the community garden. So it's all about identifying possible or potential funders. There is a lot of them outside, and research is quite time extensive. So it takes a little bit of effort to find and apply to them, to check their conditions, to check what kind of funds might be available and what actually it might be tied to it. So yes, it takes a little bit of legwork here to get to that. We were a little bit advantaged in this case because we were able to employ a community development officer for some years. That helped us a lot with working and finding funding for our village, and so far it has been, to be honest, quite successful. So yeah, but it might take a little bit of effort to identify and locate these kind of funds. Yes,
I think that's always the case. It's finding that funding is always a difficult bit. I've just popped a link to chat, a really useful resource for looking at funding as well. Emily, any top tips on funding?
Yeah, I would like to echo really what Raina said. I agree. Trying to find the funding itself can be really time consuming. So what we've started implementing at Utility Aid is if we have someone that's engaging with us for support on energy efficiency, whether it be an audit itself or the works from what the audit has revealed. We're now working with a number of funders up and down the country that support with different projects and delivery. That list is growing. And it is time extensive for us to try and find the different people to work with and signpost you to. But I would say, if in doubt or if you need any support with finding that, please get in touch with me and I can see who I can put you in touch with via my contacts as well.
Brilliant. I think I'd also look at, I think energy is quite an easy one where you can start to calculate the return on investment. So Raina, you mentioned obviously solar panels being less effective during winter, which isn't particularly surprising, but I think it's worth quantifying that. And then during those long summer evenings, how much energy you might actually be generating beyond your needs, because that can help form return on investment calculations, which then might mean you may not actually necessarily need as much funding as you thought you would do. And you can start looking at that. Especially some of the social enterprises and the kind of businesses that I've worked with, they have done the calculations and they've been surprised at how quickly things like solar panels do pay themselves back from a commercial perspective. So always worth looking into that as well. Any other quick questions coming in? Of course, some really useful links going into the chat there. So please do, if you've got any resources as well that you're aware of, please do share them. Something I was going to ask you, Emily, is just what are the most common barriers you find to people being able to make changes around energy, and what advice you'd have for people on how to overcome those, really? It sounds like you've got some great resources around, I know, like kind of the VAT thresholds and the kind of invoicing pieces as well.
I think the biggest one, especially when we look at the third and fourth sectors generally, I would say is time. I think people have got less time than what they've ever had before, especially with the funding cuts of what we've seen over the last couple of years. So I would say that's the biggest barrier. And also I'd say the other barrier is getting people on board within your organization. So when we're talking about creating a culture, it's really trying to create a culture within your team where everyone understands how much of an impact people's behaviors can have on the building, and really kind of bringing it home to the fact of why we're doing that. So we're making these changes, like Raina illustrated today with the amazing work they've been doing with their community building, community garden. If they hadn't have done those changes and implemented those changes and brought people on board on that journey, then the likelihood would be that the building wouldn't be there in the future for other people to enjoy and the community to continue to enjoy. So for me, I would say those are the biggest barriers. So I think, like we've already gone over today, I think trying to make it as interesting and as easy as possible. And I know that's annoying sometimes because you're like, why should we have to make it easy for people to do it? But if you make it easy and obtainable to make reductions quickly, for people, then they're more likely to do it. And I think also engaging young people wherever possible, because they're so excited about anything to make a prospect of a change. So we've seen huge impacts where this has been really successful within the school environment or anything where you're working with young people. They've really been able to kind of fly the flag for people to make changes culturally.
I think it's that team engagement, right, and bringing everyone on board with the journey and making sure it aligns with your broader goals as an organization as well, rather than it just being a net zero tick box. This is a bigger piece around the organization, how you tie it in. Raina, was there anything you wanted to add there before I?
Oh no, thank you. I was just listening.
No.
Just what she said. Yes, keeping it simple is very important when you communicate to the community and people involved, so that you can achieve some changes fast and not going into too much detail, because it might be confusing and start endless discussions. So that's a very good approach, I guess.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question that's come in is: do we know of any other tools other kind of than the Green Lease Toolkit around that engagement of landlords and the challenges that people face when you're in rented premises, basically, which is certainly the biggest barrier that I find across both third and private sector, is engaging landlords. Any tips there, Emily?
I know that we're working on a piece at the moment specifically with Charity Retail Association, because this is a problem that a lot of their members are coming across quite regularly. And we are, in fact, keeping an eye on some clauses that are coming in about landlords' responsibilities. I am working on, so I will share the details with Adam and also with Beth going forwards, a project with the Ethical Property Foundation. I will pop the link to their website into the chat. They're a partner of ours, they're a charity, and they focus purely on supporting organisations with anything to do with buildings. So that's the legalities of it, energy efficiency of it, and we're helping them with the energy efficiency side. They've got loads of useful tools and pieces for those specific kind of problems. So I'm more than happy to put a link to the chat if that's easy, Adam, to do that as a useful insight and tool.
Yeah, please do. Pop it into chat. We'll capture it and email it out as well. Some really interesting challenges there, and I think it's a frustrating one where everything needs to line up, and sometimes you can hit these barriers. But I think that's where personally the things like the energy vampires or energy ghosts and kind of smart plugs really come in, and that even if you do find you're hitting those barriers, there's still things that you can do within your control to be able to get around that, even if you are in a rented premises with perhaps a less helpful landlord than you would like. Another question that's come in, which I think is a really interesting one, and it's something we experienced actually on Monday when I was doing a workshop in person in town, is around public buildings and how they're often overheated. So given the cost savings and carbon reduction of turning the thermostat down, how do we start engaging either the public sector or just bigger buildings, I guess, and kind of bigger estates that might be running a big building that no one necessarily knows who the landlord is or who the property manager is? Any tips there?
I think it's really, you've got to try and get whoever's responsible for the building ultimately on board. That's the end goal. I think sometimes just drawing attention to how much it could be wasting. So drawing on examples that we know are already out there, that are already written. So using case studies as examples of how much costs have been wasted on just buildings being heated inefficiently. I know from a project we did a couple of years ago with the school, we managed to reduce the school's consumption by 70% just purely on behaviours. So drawing on examples like that and using them and applying them, obviously you have to be aware and be very aware that the differences between each building are going to be very, very different. But I think giving examples and making people aware of how much that equates to cost-wise is really important to do.
Well, I think it's going back to that piece of it's not always about new technology. So looking for funding, it might actually be a case of looking at your team and engagement and how your current heating patterns are happening and getting greater awareness over that, because you may be able to save quite a lot of cash from just, 70% just from understanding that and turning behaviors down and changing it. On that note, Raina, just a slight deviation, but how have you found the impact of the changes that you've made impacting on the local community? Have you kind of seen greater engagement from the public and people around low carbon technologies and what you've been doing? Is there any stories there?
Yeah, I think in particular, due that the village hall has now a much more affordable heating system that allows also to keep the higher rates for the village hall at bay. So that makes it easier, affordable for people in other groups to hire our village hall for their events and activities. And by keeping this cost under control, I think that makes quite a difference in the usability. And also we recognize that it's taken much more on. It's far more activities that we see now also, because they say, yeah, now the village hall is nice and warm and we're not just getting toasted by these old infrared heaters. So people appreciate actually the comfortable warmth and the even distribution. When they arrive, it is already warm. It's not still damp and cold, particularly in winter. So yes, that helps definitely with the adoption of these activities and also finding people that actually want to do something in our village hall. Absolutely.
Brilliant. I think this probably reduces the kind of the risk of barriers there to other people as well. People, if they can see and feel the technology, they're going to be more likely to adopt it themselves in their own lives, which I think is hard to track, but can't be underestimated. One quick thought as well, just before we wrap up, we've got 5 minutes left, so please do keep any questions coming in, but I'm just going to finish on some slides very quickly of kind of next steps people can take just before we finish. So I'm going to share slides. What was the case? So firstly, measuring footprints and just understanding that the climate confidence scorecard is a really important one to put in here of actually you get a lot of custom results from this. It helps us understand the challenges in the sector. So please do fill that out. It will only take you 2 or 3 minutes. In terms of things that you can do as a result of this webinar and things to go away, I think Emily's there. The 70% stat is calling loud and clear. Start doing that energy audit and understanding how your business consumption is being used. That might be smart technology, such as the picture here. It might not. I don't think it needs to be. It can just be about speaking to people and understanding what how people are feeling, what's going on, and you know how people are using and heating the spaces. Energy efficient lighting, I think, as again we saw earlier, that's nearly 60% of people haven't installed LEDs. There's a huge push here that even the simple things that we can do aren't still being done, and that might be engaging your landlord on the issue to see if they can install it. It might be something that you can do yourselves and just walk around the building and understand it. And on that energy efficiency thing, it is that engagement with landlords is going to be critical to be able to bring them on the journey as much as it is your teams. And that may be easy. It may be a slightly longer journey for you, but it's really important to be doing it nonetheless. In terms of other activities, I think it's really important if you're sat there and people like Raina's, it was great to come across of having done it and led the way, is do submit the stories that you've got to SCVO and to the Climate Confident website, because it helps us share and feature yourselves on webinars like this, get your story out there and inspire other people to take action. And there is further support as well available from Just Enterprise. So again, please do check out the website, and there have been plenty of links in the chat to the other webinars for you to go back and have a look at, and we'll be sending those out soon as well. In terms of the next webinar, apologies for the slight barrier here. The dates are wrong on that one, so I'm not going to show that slide. Let me find the dates for the next webinar. I believe it was the 19th of March, where we're looking at buying and selling and looking at your supply chain. Yeah, 19th of March at 2 p.m, same time. We'll be looking at everything here around how do we start engaging our supply chain and looking at what you're selling, your activities, how that impacts on your footprint, but more importantly, how does that start impacting on your financial resilience and how can you reduce footprint, reduce costs down as well. Those links are in the chat now. Before we round up, any final questions from the audience and any final, while I wait for any questions to come in, I'll give the two speakers a chance to think of one top tip you would like to end on and give and share from your story. So Emily, any thoughts on a top tip?
My top tip with the whole of the net zero journey is to, as I alluded to before, do things in bite-sized chunks and do things in a logical order. And please don't install equipment to your place without having an audit done first, because it might be incorrect.
Yeah, from my side, I can only tell you, when you look at heat pumps, really make sure that your building fits the concept of the heat pump. There are many, many different versions of heat pumps available. They all have their pros and cons, and matching them to your particular building or flat is a very important thing. So, and you might ask for some specialist advice here that can help you to identify the right system for yourself.
I think that's a really key point, Raina, is appropriate technology. It's not such necessarily the right technology, it's what's appropriate to your building. There's a link I'm just popping into chat as well, which is to Business Energy Scotland, where they've got a really great resource on how to conduct that energy audit really simply. I meant to share it earlier, but I forgot. So yeah, do check that out. It's a really simple way to either do the energy audit yourself, or there is funding available to get energy audits done for your building, depending on region, amongst other things. So go and check that out as well. Thank you very much to both of you for your time today and for sharing your stories. I think lots of information here to take away. Please do digest this, watch the recordings, guys, share it with your teams and start looking at things that you can do. There'll be some further links coming around, so keep an eye on your emails for both the next session, but also for some top tips. I hope everyone's had a good day and have a nice rest of Tuesday, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you, Adam. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Raina.